This is the region inside Russia where local forces are more feared than Russian army itself. It has entirely different tradition than Russia, a region where critics have vanished, and one man has ruled nearly for 2 decades. His name, the father of the people, Ramzan Kadyrov. To understand how Ramzan became one of the most powerful people in Russia, we have to understand the region he rules. Because long before he came in power, Chechnya had spent years resisting Moscow's control. This is Chechnya on map. And unlike most Russians who are traditionally associated with Orthodox Christianity, Chechens are overwhelmingly Muslim. The region has its own language, traditions, and strong culture built around family and loyalty. And Chechnya's struggle for identity didn't begin with Ramzan. Because events shaping its future started in 1944 when Stalin deported the entire Chechen population after accusing them for collaborating with Nazi Germany. Among those deported was the Kadyrov family, Ramzan's father, Akhmat Kadyrov, who would later be born in exile in Kazakhstan. After 13 years, in 1957 after Stalin's death, Soviet government allowed Chechen to return and rebuild their lives, but the damage was already done. Chechen people had that deep hatred for Soviet regime. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. As former Soviet republics gained independence, many Chechens saw an opportunity to break away from Moscow as well, which in the end resulted in a full-scale war between 1994 to 1996, as the First Chechen War. Russia fully went deep to invade the region, but faced heavy resistance, destruction, and humiliation, and had to withdraw. With their withdrawal, Chechen region became extremely unstable region. They claimed their independence in 1996 for the first time in centuries. But the economy had collapsed, government institutions were weak, and warlords competed for power. Kidnapping became common, criminal groups were at their peak, and many ordinary people started to lose faith in this new order. At the same time, Islamist fighters and extremist groups start gaining influence, raising concerns amongst Chechen people. One among them was Akhmat Kadyrov, a respected religious leader and supporter of Chechen independence. Akhmat increasingly opposed the growing influence of radical Islamists within the region. Then, in 1999, the situation reached a breaking point. Following a series of events that further destabilized the region, Russia launched the Second Chechen War. But this time, Akhmat Kadyrov made a decision that would change Chechnya forever. Opposing the growing influence of Islamist extremists, he broke with the rebels and sided with Moscow. Russia finally had something it had never possessed before, a powerful local ally. As Russian forces regained control of the region, Akhmat's influence grew rapidly, and in 2003, he became president of Chechnya. But his rule was short-lived. Just a year later, Akhmat was assassinated in a bombing, and with his death, the future of Chechnya would pass to his son, Ramzan Kadyrov. Now with his father gone, Ramzan appeared to be the obvious successor. But there was just one problem. Chechen constitution required the president to be at least 30 years old, and Ramzan at that time was only 27. Yet, despite the age restriction, he continued to gain power behind the scenes. Backed by Moscow and supported by thousands of loyal fighters inherited from his father's network, Ramzan steadily tightened his grip on the region. And finally, in 2007, Ramzan officially became the president of Chechnya. But becoming president alone wasn't enough to explain Ramzan's influence. To understand that, we need to look at his relationship with Vladimir Putin. After 2 devastating wars, Putin needed a man who can keep Chechnya stable, and Ramzan needed a man who can keep him in power. And from that point onward, Moscow began pouring billions of dollars into Chechnya, helping rebuild a region that had been devastated by years of war. And the results were impossible to miss. Grozny, once reduced to rubble during the war, was transformed into a modern city filled with new roads, skyscrapers, and massive construction projects. But the rebuild was just a part of the story. As the region was growing, so was the influence and power of Ramzan. With the Kremlin's support, he also built one of the most powerful personal security networks in the region. These forces, known as the Kadyrovtsi, would become one of the foundations of his rule. A little backstory behind this force. It started as pro-Moscow Chechen fighters during the Second War and was tied to Akhmat. After Akhmat's death, loyalty shifted to Ramzan, and today estimates vary, but some place the number of personnel loyal to Ramzan at as many as 70,000. Over the years, the Kadyrovtsi played a major role in crushing the remaining insurgency and maintaining control across the region. But as their power grew, so did their reputation. To supporters, they were the force that brought stability to a region devastated by decades of war. To critics, they were something far more intimidating. Human rights organizations and activists have repeatedly accused Chechen security forces of intimidation, abuse, and targeting opponents of the government. Over time, this created an atmosphere where challenging Ramzan Kadyrov became increasingly difficult. Whether viewed as protectors or enforcers, one thing was undeniable. The Kadyrovtsi had become one of the most important pillars of Ramzan's rule. And with this huge amount of power, Ramzan would begin transforming Chechnya in his own image. Over the years, Islamic influence became increasingly visible throughout public life. Massive mosques were built across the republic, conservative social values were promoted, and in public, women were expected to wear headscarves. These views extended far beyond dress codes. Ramzan himself repeatedly took a hardline stance on LGBTQ issues, once claiming that there were no gay people in Chechnya at all.
Это ерунда. У нас таких людей нету. Нету у нас геев.
Supporters saw this as a return to traditional Chechen values after decades of war and instability. Critics, however, argued that Chechnya was beginning to operate by a very different set of rules than the rest of Russia. Yet for many ordinary people, one thing was difficult to ignore. The violence of the war years was gone, cities were being rebuilt, and Ramzan's image was becoming inseparable from Chechnya's recovery. Many even began referring to him as the father of the people. And now, after nearly 2 decades in power, a new question is beginning to emerge. What happens to Chechnya when Ramzan Kadyrov is no longer around? In recent years, rumors has been spreading about Ramzan's illness, raising question about Chechnya's future. At the same time, Ramzan's sons have become increasingly visible in public life. His eldest son, Akhmat, has already received several prominent positions, while 3 of his sons were even publicly presented as taking part in the war in Ukraine. To supporters, this was a sign of loyalty and leadership. To others, it looked like the Kadyrov family was already preparing the next generation for power. But succession has never been the real question. The real question is whether anyone can inherit the influence Ramzan Kadyrov spent nearly 2 decades building. And for a republic shaped so heavily by one man, the answer may determine Chechnya's future long after he is gone.